So we're going to extend our conversation from yesterday into the spiritual domain, which I know for this community is perhaps more familiar than depth psychology. And is it okay if we have some discussion at the end? Yeah, okay. So I'll try to limit my remarks to an hour so we have some time to chat. In every tradition, and theosophists explore many of them, saints and poets speak of the soul's search for the beloved, the seeker's yearning for the divine. And this secret feeling I mentioned yesterday, I call the holy longing, from Goethe, who wrote a poem of that name. Some of you might know that poem. It's really exquisite. And our holy longing is a divine restlessness. It's a whisper of the soul that leads us to pursue higher union in spiritual practice and religious discipleship and even romantic embrace. It guides us to timeless wisdom and to transcendent experiences. And it's because of this yearning for something other, this timeless longing for something beyond ourselves, that human beings sit still, cross-legged, eyes closed, as the splendors of spring pass us by. And it's because of this longing that we strive to lose ourselves in one another in ecstatic embrace, like Shiva and Shakti, weaving creation. And it's because of this longing that we build Sistine chapels and sculpt the David and compose the Messiah. It's because of this longing that monks and nuns wall off the difficult demands of bodily life. Like mystics in all traditions, they yearn for transcendence and union. It's also because of our holy longing that Islamic fundamentalists fighting a jihad sacrifice their lives to go to paradise. And it's because of this yearning that cult fanatics, such as those at Jonestown and Waco, commit group suicide to attain the other world. Yes, our spiritual yearning can go awry in many ways. When we project the divine onto an authoritarian teacher or priest, guru or roshi, who's all too human and has a shadow. If he or she abuses power, whether the abuse is sexual, financial, or emotional coercion, we feel the shock of betrayal, our innocence is lost, and our faith is shaken. He cannot be enlightened as he claimed, we say. She has secrets. She's not who I thought she was. The priest lied. The congregation was duped. In our time, we've witnessed many contemporary teachers in Buddhism, Hinduism, and Catholicism, and Judaism too, act out their shadows in destructive ways, leaving their followers traumatized and lost. And some of us have experienced religious or spiritual abuse and its consequent heartbreak and disillusionment. So our holy longing can also go awry when we project it onto a romantic partner who cannot carry the perfect ideal for us and whose shadow erupts in a shocking way. So I'm drawing parallels here for you. This is not the person I married. I chose the wrong man again. I trusted her and she cheated. Romantic love carries a mythic power in our time, and many people worship at its altar. When their beloved falls from grace, they descend into despair, a dark night of the soul. And it also goes awry, we spoke a little bit about this yesterday, when we misplace it onto food, alcohol, drugs, or sex. And we long for a substance, the same way that people long for the divine, to join with it in an end to loneliness and to fill us up in an end to emptiness. Just one last hit and I'll be okay. If I can only eat that, I'll be satisfied, right? So in each case, with the collapse of the projections, the real inner work begins. And we can see through our projections to the humanity in the other person, his darkness and light, her humanity and divinity. And slowly we come to see that our beloved teacher, or our beloved partner, or our beloved substance is not responsible for carrying the divine for us. And we recognize that what they carried for us was inside of us all along. And as we begin to reclaim our projections to carry our own wounds and our own greatness, we need others in a different way. Not to parent us, not to connect us to the divine, but to join us in the dance between love and freedom and union and autonomy. When you imagine God, what do you see in your mind's eye? A stern, bearded male perched on a throne with angels circling his head? A beatific Madonna with an infant at her breast? A black four-armed goddess dancing on a corpse? I see shakes, but in many parts of the world, this is an image of the goddess, Kali. A seated Buddha with his palm up in greeting. Indra's net as it weaves through and interconnects all living beings. The letters of a holy name. A colorful mandala. A sacred mountain. A sparkling void. Each religion comes with its own images of God full blown, and we absorb them, sometimes with our mother's milk, and then they lie dormant for decades in our shadows. And we long for them, and we pray to them, and even unknowingly we pray to them. Our holy longing points the way toward an image of God, or the divine, whatever name you give to that. And in turn, it can guide us in the direction of the ineffable, unknowable realm behind the image, right? The absolute, the Ein Sof, whatever name you give to that. If our self-images evolve, but our God images do not, they might haunt us like ancestral ghosts. As Bob Dylan says, you got to serve somebody. Who are you serving? Have you examined your hidden object of desire? If it remains unconscious in the shadow, then it can act upon you, pulling you like a magnet to unknown territory, even to spiritual shadow. Here's an example of a community that longs for God but falls into darkness. Some of you may know the late writer Oliver Sacks. In The Anthropologist on Mars, he tells the story of the last hippie. I love this story because I was a hippie in Berkeley. So in Berkeley in the 1960s, a young student disappeared. When his parents last saw him, he seemed thin and healthy with a full head of hair. But as time passed, they grew worried and they hired a private investigator. and the investigator found him in a Hare Krishna commune on the East Coast. A Swami in orange robes brought their son to the door. He was unrecognizable. He was obese, hairless, and lethargic. What had happened? The Swami explained that their son was enlightened. He was imperturbable, living in the present moment. Although his eyesight was weakening, the Swami said, his inner sight was opening. The parents insisted on taking their son for medical tests, only to discover that he had a large pituitary tumor that had grown into his front lobes and pressured his optic nerve. It was no longer operable. Oliver Sacks was called in to examine him and found that the man had no memory except for a short period in the 1960s. And more than anything, he remembered the lyrics of Grateful Dead songs. When Oliver Sacks took him to a Dead concert, the man leaped out of his wheelchair, singing along with every word of every song. When the music ended, he slumped back, dazed and lethargic. 2 days later, when Sacks asked him how he liked the concert, he said, "What concert?" This kind of spiritual abuse is covert. The Krishnas used a spiritual understanding to rationalize events, which led them to deny evidence of medical problems and to neglect their member. They were blinded in the name of vision, and they interpreted memory loss as living in the present moment. They didn't intend harm, but they refused to see what was before them because in their holy longing, they elevated everything to a spiritual reality and projected their own ideals of enlightenment onto somebody else, which reinforced their dogma and their cult-like behavior. So like the longing for God, the longing for a beloved partner stirs in our souls and leads us wandering in search of romantic union. Our egos cannot direct our desire. We can't make ourselves love one person over another, and we can't make ourselves stop loving someone. We're subject to this object of desire, as we are subject to God. I suggest that erotic yearning both conceals and reveals divine love. It's not just individual longing, it contains an archetypal longing within it, a spiritual desire for completion through union. And yes, our unconscious images of our parents influence our attractions, as we spoke about last night, but that's not our topic today. We also project the light, or the self, onto a partner when we fall in love. And in this idealization, he or she becomes soulmate, savior, hero, goddess. And in that way, we're unconsciously asking a partner to carry a spiritual projection for us. That's why I'm including this here. We ask a partner to carry our meaning, our purpose, which we're failing to carry for ourselves. And what happens as a result? 50% divorce rate. Why? Because in our intimacy, we meet the shadow. The sender of the projection is diminished if he believes his partner is responsible for his moods, his motivation, his purpose, his spiritual development. And so he rages and grows depressed. The receiver of the projection may feel high for a while. If someone's ever really adored you, you may feel high for a while. But inevitably, you end up feeling unseen. and ultimately act out in a way to try to be more real, to try to have other parts of you seen. And so as the projections collapse, the partners are shocked at who they see. And they may be hurt and angry and disillusioned, unaware that this is where the real relationship begins, as we spoke about last night. When we find a spiritual teacher or a guide who evokes our soul's longing, the image, the internal image, leaps out into the outer world, onto a human being. And like the mythic Hindu gopis worshiping Krishna, or contemporary devotees adoring a guru, a rebbe, a sheikh, we're filled with feelings of exaltation in the presence of our teacher. And the teacher, we believe, has realized the ideal living within the student, right? We believe that this person is awake, or will give us salvation, or is enlightened, that our ideal image is given to this other human being. So once this is activated, this holds a promise and a duty. It's a summons to a greater life, and it also calls for the death of everything that stands in the way. And some of you who have committed to a teacher, you know what I mean. So what would lead us to endow another human being with so much power and authority? On one level, this projection is a replay of childhood images of authority, as Freud would say. We long for unconditional approval and acceptance. We long to feel special and chosen and part of something larger. But our soul's holy longing for communion is beneath our personal psychology. And this is, I think, what Freud missed. This is kind of where Jung picked up from Freud. The archetypal projection carries the light, the divine image of the self, the higher self I'm talking about. When a teacher carries the light, the student longs for union with the teacher. That was my image of the divine human for a long time. And so when a student longs for union with the teacher, there's an inherent separation between you. And that fuels our longing. And that becomes the basis for devotional traditions, which some of you may have studied. There are devotional traditions in every lineage. I wrote about this in my novel about Rumi, the Sufi poet, and his life of longing for his teacher Shams. Some of you may know the story. And his poetry arose out of this ecstatic yearning for his joining with his teacher. There are inherent dangers in this dynamic. The risk of giving our spiritual radiance or light to another person and losing our own internal connection to it. The risk of giving our power of independent thinking to another person and losing our connection to our own discrimination. The risk of giving our emotional authority to another person and losing our connection to our own authentic feelings. The risk of losing agency, the capacity to act on our own behalf or on behalf of others. And finally, our holy longing makes us susceptible to authoritarianism and risking spiritual abuse. If this is resonating for you and you're interested in this, there is a fabulous series on Netflix right now called Wild Wild Country, which is the story of the Rajneesh community. And it's a documentary, and so you see firsthand the beauty in the vision and the way that it is taken over by shadow and ultimately becomes extremely dark. It's a very moving series. So sadly, the longing for the light often evokes its opposite, a shattering encounter with spiritual darkness, an emptying out of hope, meaning, and our previous images of God. Before the encounter with spiritual shadow, we're innocent, trusting believers. And I know that many of you have been there. We're the chosen, we will be saved, we will be enlightened, God is on our side. But at some point, we suffer an emotional or financial coercion, or a sexual violation, or a coercive group dynamic. And we wake up, and we see through the ideal projection to a dark shadow or a human flaw, and our projection cracks. And if the disillusionment is shattering, we enter the via negativa. So in our time, many secret shadows have come out into the light. I wrote about them extensively in the book, Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality. We witnessed, because that book was my attempt to understand what happened to me and what was happening to so many others at the time in the 90s when we were witnessing the scandal of childhood sexual abuse among Catholic priests. You all remember that? And the scandals of many Eastern gurus who claimed to be celibate and required that their students be celibate, but were in fact seducing their students. In every tradition this happened. And so the priest-parishioner, teacher-disciple relationship can be the most sacred of a lifetime. If it fails, it invalidates our own judgment and also our vision to which we devoted our lives. If we speak up, we're excommunicated or expelled or disbelieved. And that's why denial is epidemic. And let me give you another example of this. In the 1990s, Yogi Amrit Desai, some of you may have heard of him, he founded Kripalu Yoga Ashram in Massachusetts. And he claimed to be an adept at Kundalini practice. He taught his students that sex would slow students' progress toward enlightenment and that celibacy would enhance spiritual energy. This is a well-known teaching in monastic traditions and in India in many traditions. So it wasn't that he was saying something unusual, right? But he was teaching this in the West, as many other teachers were. So when a woman disciple told others that she had sexual relationship with Desai, because he told her that it was a spiritual gift and special privilege, he denied her story. And this denial was accepted by the community. Even the woman's husband and son, who remained at the ashram after she left. Then another woman came forward with the same claim. And this time, Desai admitted both affairs and made a public apology to the community. But his students were outraged, and they were heartbroken and demoralized because what we're understanding here, because the man who carried their image of the divine human had violated the moral code that he had imposed on them. And as the projection of his infallibility cracked, long-buried resentments surfaced about other issues, and the community fractured. In his traditional Indian guru role, Desai responded by trying to teach surrender and love and selfless service. Later, the staff brought in a diverse group of therapists to assist them to resolve the betrayal and to work with the other emotional issues that years of practicing yoga had left untouched in the shadow. I learned about this because Marion Woodman, a Jungian analyst, was a friend at the time, and she was one of the people who was called in to support the community. So as a result, the community was reorganized in a more egalitarian mode with a council of residents and payment for seva or service. Desai began to learn about projection, and he came to understand that his Indian model did not address early childhood wounds in his students around abuse, authority, and self-expression. He resigned. "I'm determined to use the failure of the dream," he said, "as an opportunity to dismantle the old form. I'm letting go of my attachment to the parental role, my self-concept, my ego. I'm exploring how to blend yoga and psychotherapy to create a new model. There is no map." I didn't follow Yogi Amrit Desai, but when I was writing this talk for you, I checked him out, and he moved to Florida where he started a new yoga school. He's 80 or 85 now. So this process at Kripalu is a rare example of communal shadow work in which the teacher confesses and tries to make amends with the group. Individuals are supported in their healing, and the institutions are reorganized to reflect a new level of understanding. Some of you may know right now, this month, Shambhala Buddhist community, founded by Trungpa Rinpoche, is in shock about reports of sexual abuse by his Dharma heir. And it's being called #ShambhalaMeToo. And so some people I know are in the middle of this process right now of grief and shock and recognizing their own denial at not having been able to actually look at their teacher's shadow or speak about their teacher's shadow. I hope that doesn't distress anyone here too much if you didn't know about it. I've treated many people, I've treated many people in my clinical work whose reality was shattered by a spiritual teacher's covert or overt abuse. And today it's become clear to me that although a spiritual group's teachings may be really valuable and its practices life-enhancing, its organizational structures may be authoritarian. And so the coping strategies that are epidemic in alcoholic homes may be prevalent in churches and spiritual communities. Let me explain that. An authority in power exploits others for his or her own narcissistic needs. His or her transgressions are often boundary violations, psychic, emotional, sexual, or financial. Like a child, the member chosen for abuse is made to feel special. And this is often what happens in alcoholic homes. The students and staff, like other children, enable the authorities' dysfunctional behavior. And the secret is like the glue that holds things together. Members deny their own feelings, doubt, danger, common sense. They project their ideal onto the authority, leading to emotional dependency, They maintain that image at all cost, like a child protecting an abusive parent. They rationalize the destructive behavior as sanctioned by God or the enlightened teacher. And members are threatened with retaliation when they try to disclose the secrets or leave. We've heard a lot about this with Scientology, but it's also prevalent in other communities. So for many, these patterns repeat a childhood pattern with an abusive parent. Our traumatic histories leave us vulnerable at turning points in our lives, when we feel lost or purposeless to the attraction of a charismatic leader or powerful dogma. And the consequences can be devastating. When denial breaks down, or I might say breaks through, some believers succumb to rage, blaming a church or a satsang, a teacher or God. Their feelings of broken trust and betrayal lead them to distrust others and lose faith. Some people succumb to depression, losing their communities, their worldviews, and their purpose all at once. Many feel guilty about the lies with which they colluded. Others feel ashamed at having been duped by a teacher, and they struggle with isolation, sexuality, finances, and developmental issues that were delayed by being in this closed community. Some people suffer PTSD, nightmares, and anxiety, and when sexual violations are involved, they may feel a loss of self, turning to drugs and alcohol to numb out. Finally, if they receive proper support and guidance, the separation from the teacher or from the group may be used as a stage of individuation, a needed step like leaving the family toward becoming an adult, a needed step for some toward spiritual maturity. So, in Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality, I offer some guidelines for people who have had this experience to begin to recover. And some of us have found the narrow path through the darkness and experienced an initiation. We travel from spiritual innocence through the dark descent, across the threshold to a new level of consciousness, spiritual maturity. We evolve from victim and victimizer, from childlike dependency on a parent, through meeting the shadow and accepting it as part of the path toward spiritual adulthood. So the first point is reclaiming your light. When we find a beloved priest or teacher and give away our light, our spirit, we permit another person to carry our flame. And we come to believe that that person alone can mediate the divine for us. I know you've heard people in Christian churches talk about this, because that's in the press a lot. We're not made in God's image, then. The one who carries our divine image alone is. We're no longer burdened with a direct relationship to our own spiritual authority, because we're passing it on. And we come to identify with a narrow role ourselves, right? Student, seeker, believer, child. In some cases, sinner, doubter, lazy meditator. So to reclaim our light, we need our own direct experience of the light, our own experience of pure awareness, or pure consciousness, or transcendence, or spirit, whatever we call it. The mind's belief that we are that our essential nature is good, is not enough. We need to put our belief into practice, to experience it daily, allowing ourselves to dip into the inner silence and expand into the vastness. And I know that in the Theosophy life, in this way, that meditation is offered as a part of the path. And for me, it's the beginning and it's the end of it. It's the primary. Study and service are also my life, but meditation is the root, because then we have our own direct connection to our light. And this doesn't mean that we stop learning from wise people. It only means that we stop giving them our spiritual authority. We can respect others without projecting our light onto them. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple questions to take home for those of you who are interested as I go through this next few steps. So, have you projected your spiritual potential onto someone else? If he or she carries the light, what do you carry? What do you need to reclaim in order to carry your own light? Okay, the next step is reclaiming your beliefs. So we all need outer guidance and mentoring at times for spiritual instruction and direction. But most importantly, we need to cultivate a connection to our own inner wisdom through growing an awareness of our thoughts and feelings and intuitions and images and dreams. So if in a spiritual group we shut down our own intuition or doubts, our own bodily cues that something is wrong, then we struggle with the tension between our inner knowing and the outer authority, right? We struggle between, this doesn't feel right, well, he's enlightened and he's telling me to do it. Whatever version of that. So we end up giving the power of definition over our lives to somebody else. And if they circumscribe how we spend time, energy, money, and what we believe, then our questions become taboo. Our questions go into the shadow. And if they define right and wrong thinking, who is on God's side and who is not? Who is going to heaven or becoming enlightened and who is not? Then we don't think for ourselves for a time. And we're identifying with a dogma. So, while spiritual practice holds immense value for spiritual development, some of the teachings around it may be outdated and even destructive to emotional, cognitive, and moral development, which happen very independently of spiritual development. Some of you may have studied Ken Wilber. One of his great contributions is his discussion of lines of development. And part of the reason we can see people very spiritually evolved do morally reprehensible things is because they're morally undeveloped. Or a lot of the teachers who came from the East were very emotionally undeveloped, you know. They were like children, even though spiritually they might have been evolved. So this distinction, which I learned from Wilbur, enabled me to reclaim my own independent thinking while I continued my practice when I left my own community. It's the direct experience of pure awareness, pure consciousness, satori, big mind, whatever we call it, kensho. It's not our beliefs or theories about it that brings the rewards. So here's some questions for you to take home. Do your inherited family beliefs still fit your life experience and lessons learned today? Do your beliefs given by a teacher from another tradition still fit who you are today? If not, what do you believe now about the divine and your own connection to it? Is it transcendent, outside of us? Immanent, within us? Is it an all-nurturing mother? Or a personal savior? Or an impersonal interconnectedness, such as Gaia, pure consciousness? What do you need to reclaim in order to think critically and independently about this? Okay, reclaiming your image of the divine. Just as you may be unaware of the inner voice of a shadow character, as we spoke about yesterday, we may be unaware of inner images that have guided us and that now sabotage us in the same way. Our spiritual yearning often has hidden within it an object of desire, an image of God or the beloved or guru, paradise or self. And our souls long for it and follow it like a fragrance. At times we catch a glimpse of the sacred image and it calls to us. A Madonna inspires purity. A judge inspires moral fitness. Kuan Yin inspires compassion. A king inspires obedience. A goddess inspires connection to the earth. A Buddha inspires stillness. A holy book inspires yearning. Jung wrote of the God image he called the Imago Dei. As he uncovered it in his patients' transference onto him, their projection of the light onto him. And in the psychology of religion, researchers have found that this image can develop throughout our lives, transforming from an unconditional mother to a protector father, to a creator, to a more symbolic image. We learn to pray to it in both conscious and unconscious ways, and it changes in response to our life experience. But most of the time it recedes and lies dormant in the shadow. And no one teaches us how to unearth these images and reimagine them. So they remain unchanged for decades. And if they remain static while we grow into adulthood, then we remain in bondage to childhood representations. This certainly happened to me unknowingly when I met my first meditation teacher. And he was seated cross-legged in a white robe with a beatific smile on his face. And that image for me became the image of the divine human, and it called to me, and I yearned for it for decades. And it served me by guiding me to prioritize spirituality in my life. But it stopped serving me when I chose to marry and live a fully worldly life. My image of the divine human as a puritanical yogi became a shadow figure for me then. So, how do we rekindle the flame of our yearning and our connection to the path? And for most of you, because you're here, you may not need to rekindle it. You may feel it burning or whispering in your soul or burning in your belly. But I want to suggest that a daily spiritual life can be more authentic when it's rooted in this yearning of the soul. And our particular form of yearning can offer a glimpse into the hidden object of our desire, whether it's a beloved partner, a divine human, or a divine image. And now you can be aware of the risks of projecting your light. You can view a meeting with spiritual shadow as an initiation into the divine darkness. You can do your inner work to rekindle the flame if you need to ever go through these steps of reclaiming your projections. And your holy longing can lead you back to self-knowledge and forward to your destiny. In my next book, The Reinvention of Age, I'm going to explore mature spirituality or elder spirituality through interviews with spiritual elders in many traditions. And if you're interested in that topic, you can. I'm blogging excerpts of the book on Medium. Do you know about Medium? And you're welcome to kind of read along with me as I write. I have posted interviews with Father Thomas Keating and Anna Douglas, who is a Buddhist teacher at Spirit Rock. So for me, there's a stage of spiritual development that moves beyond projection. And rather than connecting with the divine through an intermediary, you can make a direct relationship to the divine in your own soul. And then you're freed by the teacher rather than trapped. And the image of the divine human acts as a window, not a wall. And our longing can lead us to higher levels of consciousness and ultimately to non-dual awareness, in which all the images disappear and we have a direct perception, I am that, thou art that, all this is that. So that's the promise of doing our practices, meeting darkness on the path, and reclaiming our own light. Thank you. Any questions on spirituality?
Yeah, the first one is just a brief comment, and that is that there is a word in Sanskrit for this holy longing, and it's called mutmashuva, and that's the Sanskrit word for it. And then the other one, I just wondered if you would comment in light of your ideal spiritual guru in white flowing robes, your outfit today. Just wondered if you'd make a comment on that.
Isn't that funny?
I guess it's your shadow coming out.
Well,
it became a spiritual shadow.
Well, that's very perceptive. You know, I was concerned about the heat here because it was predicted to be so hot, which it's not. And so I thought I would wear white. Consciously, I thought I would wear white because of the heat. Maybe there was some kind of a shadow thing going on about catching your projection of the light that I was not aware of. I'm open to looking at that, so thank you.
Hi, I was wondering if you would comment on the difference between receiving feedback from someone in something that you're in denial about compared to someone else's projection, like you should, and I hear that periodically from somebody is you should be doing this or you should look at this, and I wonder, is this something that I should be looking at, or is that other person's projection and it's just like, okay, I understand this is about you and not about me?
That's a very sophisticated question. So most of us are not good communicators. We haven't learned. No one teaches us how to speak in I statements and be accountable for our experience, right? And, this is part of the problem with shadowboxing in couples, the communication problem. So I think if I were having that experience, I would ask the other person to communicate it to me in an I statement so that I could hear whether it fit me or not. Because if I hear a should, I'm speaking for myself, if I hear a should, I get a big internal don't tell me what to do shadow. Right? I have a big rebel inside, Berkeley hippie and all that. So I need to be able to bypass that in order to receive feedback. So I would ask the other person, if it's someone who understands what you just asked me, I would say, I would like to hear you differently. I'm not sure whether this is about me or about you. So if you communicate it in a way that I can hear it, let's see what happens. So, so this person, is always telling you that you're critical, for example, okay? If that person said, I feel criticized, you would hear it very differently than the person saying, you should stop criticizing everybody. So that's kind of how I would work with it for myself. I hope that's useful. Because they could both be going on. Yeah.
I won't go into my whole spiritual history, but for a long time, for as long as I can remember, I've always felt like spirituality is really the central thing. And yet at the same time, I've always been skeptical of the kind of devotion that you talk about. Mm-hmm. But I guess I'm a little bit jealous in a way. I think there probably is some value in devotion. I think the word I would use is commitment. Mm-hmm. I have a hard time committing to one thing. Mm-hmm. I find, a lot in theosophy. I think theosophy is great. But I don't call myself a theosophist. Mm-hmm. I don't identify with a label. Mm-hmm. But, I wonder about my resistance to that and my lack of commitment. And I'll just let you comment on that.
Okay. Do other people here have that experience? Yeah, I think that's a common experience. So there are kind of many layers, I think, or levels of devotion to our spiritual lives that we don't want to kind of mix up and collapse into one thing. So I'm very devoted to my practice. I haven't missed for 50 years. I'm very devoted to my practice. I'm not devoted to a teacher. I'm not devoted to a community. I'm not even a member officially of a community. And, the statistics among baby boomers now, because that's what I'm writing for, so that's what I've been studying. There are millions of baby boomers who call themselves unaffiliated seekers, who cannot join for whatever reason, or maybe did at some point and then got burned in the way we're talking about, or maybe just don't have the psychology of joining and being members. And then there are a lot of other baby boomers now who are returning to church and synagogue and trying to find community and practice in their families, in their inherited traditions. So it's an individual path, and it's rooted in our life experience and in our psychologies and in our family, our early family dynamics, because our early families are the first communities of which we were members. So mine, for example, was very smothering and enmeshed. And so I'm always about breaking free of whatever I try to join. Other people's families were so loose and disconnected that they felt alone, and they want to join things. So, I think, and devotion, I think, is a sloppy word in the sense that there is a devotional path. There's devotional Christianity, spousal mysticism, there's devotional practice in Hinduism, there's devotional practice in Buddhism. It's about the heart chakra. So it's a very specific word for a kind of a path. And and I think a lot of I have the sense that a lot of people in this room are oriented more to study, which is not a devotional. It's a different orientation to spirituality. So I think I would use discipline. I mean, my husband is always saying, you're so disciplined. I can do my sitting practice every day, but not only that, I can write for endless hours and not get up. So there's an internal discipline. Yes, it's a commitment, it's a consistency, but it feels to me like a discipline that I bring to those, because writing is also a practice. Writing is very much a spiritual practice. Because you have to empty your mind. I mean, for people who are writing from their heads, it's not so much. But when you empty your mind and allow it to come through, it's a practice. That's kind of a contemplative journey, right? So I don't know, that's a complicated response.
I would like for you to relate what you have been saying in terms of the baby boomers and some thinking about going back to their homes and some not. As the society is now focusing, as I strongly support it, on outreach, how would you say the society should portray itself, present itself, either verbally, emotionally, pictorially, to attract that younger group that is interested in finding another home or refinding a home?
Are you referring to Theosophy Society?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't clear. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Oh. That's a really good question. When Neil and I arrived here on Friday, we were saying how at home we felt. Because we've been through so many paths, we've been on so many paths and done so many practices. And so there was something about the openness. There was a non-judgmental feeling. There was a non-judgmental feeling, a welcoming feeling. I mean, it's hard to put that in your marketing material. I think that in our topic today, let's tie it back to my presentation. So, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, of people who are now in their 60s and 70s have been burned by spirituality or religion, traditional religion or spirituality. And it would be so wonderful to offer a home to those people, to find their way back, to rekindle their flame, and find whatever practice from whatever lineage, fits for them. So maybe there's a way to, I have the same question because I have to market my book to this group. I have found in thinking about that there's boomer radio stations, there's many baby boomer platforms now online. So my suggestion would be to look for where boomers are and to try to make presentations there, to try to get interviews, do guest blogs, do try to get magazine stories, try to get all kinds of exposure where boomers are, because you have something here that people need, that the holy longing doesn't go away. When I use that term, does everyone in the room kind of know what I'm talking? Yeah. And so just because we may have gotten disillusioned and even heartbroken, that longing doesn't go away. It may go dormant for years for some people. And it especially, I think, goes dormant. That's why I made the remark about younger people. When we're building families and careers, it kind of recedes during that time. And so I think 50 and after, it comes back, and I think that some people are returning to churches because they're facing their mortality. But I don't think that's the only reason. I think it's also because, I interviewed, is that Rami back there? Yes. Hi. I interviewed a Rabbi Laura Geller recently, and she said to me that the synagogues are so good at attracting families, but once the kids are gone, there's nothing there for the boomer parents. And she's trying to create that in communities in LA, in Jewish communities. And I think that's like a really important insight, that the traditional congregations that have been family-oriented don't have rites of passage for older people, don't have spiritual practice necessarily for older people, and you guys have that. So maybe there's some way that you can, let me think about it. I really like this question. Yeah, let me think about it. It's really important.